Okay, I'm recording this session. So good morning, everyone. Today's webinar is how to pitch your story to the media. So we have Jojo and Robin Wilson. Jojo is dialing in from Singapore and Robin is dialing in from Phuket. So I'll pass on to Jojo to kick off this session. Jojo?
Thanks, Veronica. Hi, everyone. Good morning from Singapore. So we started off with last month, we started off with a series of communications webinar for small businesses who are interested in reaching out to the media and getting their stories out to the media. And the idea is that if you are successful in getting your stories out to the media, they run the articles or your video story or product story without advertising. That would actually help you a lot in your reputation building and lead generation. So the first one we did last month was how to write a press release. So today, we're going to take you to the next step, which is after you've done your press release, for example, or you've got an event coming up. So how do you pitch your story to the media? Let me just start off with, let me introduce Vermilion Pinstripes to everyone. We are an agency, a marketing and communications agency based in Australia and Singapore. In Australia, we have offices in Sydney and Melbourne. And we work very closely with companies who are local. We also work with regional companies and outside of Australia, so international firms as well. So I actually have quite a lot of projects going on in Korea, Taiwan, and Indonesia. So now we focus a lot on using communications and marketing to help businesses thrive with confidence. It's always an integrated program, and we have a framework that we use, and it's a patented framework. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a communication specialist. I've been doing communications for over 25 years. I stopped counting after a while, but it's been a mix of internal and external communications, and very much using comms, okay, as a tool to build the emotional connection between the brand, the business, and its publics, and also to help the company generate leads. Outside of work, I am very active in a group called, it's an animal welfare group called Love Kucing Project. Kucing means cat in Malay. So we do a lot of work for cats who are injured, cats in the community. And there's something else that we do. We bring cats from happy families over to nursing homes or special needs institutions for feline therapy. So I'm going to pass over to Robin to introduce himself.
Yeah,
Robin,
good morning, everyone. I'm Robin. I look a bit like a ghost at the moment on my camera. I don't know why that is. It's something to do with the lighting in the room, but I'm not usually this washed out. But my career started as a journalist way back in the 1970s in the UK, and I trained as a journalist on newspapers there, weekly newspapers to start with, then daily newspapers. And then after that, I moved into public relations in the UK for a number of years, before moving to work abroad in public relations and in the Middle East and Asia. I now live in Phuket and still work here and there doing various projects. So during my career, I've been a journalist, receiving pitches from people, and then I was on the other end of the phone giving pitches to journalists and trying to get stories in newspapers. So I've seen it from both sides of the equation, and that's what I hope to give to you this morning.
Thanks, Robin.
Okay,
so I'm just going to run through the agenda. We've structured this training, this webinar, in 3 parts. So part 1 is really very much about why we need to pitch the media. So we have to understand how the media works, what they want and don't want. and then discuss what outcomes you want to achieve. Then part two would be the fundamentals of a media pitch. So how do you build a media pitch? So there are some basic steps that we will take you through. Robin will take you through parts 1 and 2, and then after that I'll close off with part 3. So examples of media pitches. One is about using a press release, another one is using a media invite. Okay, so how we're going to do this is that Marin is going to help me with checking the chat box. So when Robin is talking, if you have any questions, just put into the chat. And at the end of each part, I will just go through that and we'll go through some of the questions that you might have. All right. Okay, so Robin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Joju. So this section, we're going to discuss what the media is and how to pitch to them. Have the next slide. Okay, understanding the media. The first definition I want to give you here is the media we're talking about this morning is professional media. We're not talking about social media. We're not talking about Instagrammers. We're not talking about people who have YouTube accounts and call themselves YouTube influencers. In the bigger picture and in today's communications world, these people have their place. But we're talking about professional media, trained media. We're talking about newspapers with websites, monthly magazines, trade magazines, TV stations and radio stations. So we're talking about a different kind of animal, really. So what do these media want? They basically want to give readers information that will interest them. But the first step of that is to get the media interested in information. So you have to try and get them hooked into what you're talking about and get them interested in covering it. A lot of their stories fit inside a bigger perspective. They follow trends that are happening at the moment. They're topical. Obviously, the big trend at the moment, or the topical story, is COVID-19. You'll see, if you've been following media, you'll see that 90% of the stories these days are angled around COVID-19. A lot of people have been taking advantage of it. Companies coming out with products to help people do COVID-19 testing, etc., etc. People offering their services to help people in lockdown, to deliver food to them, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stories which are related into that around the local communities. Now, one thing media don't like is, and we'll go on to it later, is advertising masquerading as news. It really puts their backs up and they won't cover it at all. So they're trying to differentiate between real news from companies and PR companies and marketers, and to try and find out what the real story is. Sometimes these stories can set an agenda for public debate, as we've seen with COVID-19. A lot of stories can go on to create discussion. Certainly in Britain, the stories I've been following about COVID-19 have set up great debates about the role of the government and or the alleged missteps they've made in handling the whole pandemic. But overall, what a lot of professional media does is provide readers with an objective third-party viewpoint. They're not they're pushing their own views. They're trying to make people make up their own minds. And the underlying quality of all media, like you and everybody else, they're businesses, they're trying to be success, they want to make money. They make money not only from advertising, but they make money from being seen as a credible news source that people want to look at and read. So they want their stories to be credible, they want them to be believable, and they want them to be true. They want to be a successful business, just like you. Okay. So media are professional journalists, and as we've said, a lot of them are trained journalists like myself. In the UK, there's a National Council for the Training of Journalists, and we all had to go on courses, learn shorthand, learn about newspaper law, so we didn't write stories that got the newspaper sued for lots of money. We had to learn about local government, national government laws, the constitution of government and laws, the process of the legal system, all these things. So you're talking with a lot of journalists, you're talking about professional people. You're not talking about an Instagrammer who lives in his mum's basement and puts up photographs every day. This is a completely different kind of animal. So the kind of media they work in is print. We can have daily newspapers, weekly, monthly magazines. Nowadays, all of these publications have websites. They have their own digital editions. And in many respects, these get more eyes on them than actual print. Print seems to be a dying medium, and website is coming on. And allied to that are website blogs as well, which give another dimension to news. Also, there are radio and TV, which I think will always be popular and sought after as a news medium. Now, all these journalists have different things they work on, but they all have different needs. And the two of the most important ones they have are the relevance of a story to their readership. They will want something that will resonate in the local community. They will want something that's credible, and they all work under deadlines. They all work under the hammer hanging over their head of meeting a deadline, of getting things done on time. They all have time constraints, and we'll see how important that is later. Now, on the right side of the screen, we've put together a basic, a typical example of a chain of command within a newsroom. This I think is a newspaper newsroom, and it just shows the layout of the process of how stories are put together and who's responsible for them. At the bottom there, they're not actually bottom feeders, but they're right at the bottom are the people who churn out the stories, the reporters, the correspondents, the staff writers, also the photographers who work at the coalface. They go out, they get the stories, they produce them, and they send them in. The next one is a sub-editor who reads these stories and decides if they're any good, basically, and decides how they can be used, how they can be put together. And importantly, sub-editors write headlines, reporters don't. So if you ever have an occasion where somebody writes something about you and you don't like the headline, don't complain to the reporter who's written it, because it's nothing to do with him. We do talk later, or we did talk before in our press release webinar about catchy headlines and getting people attracted. If you're lucky, if your headline's good enough, they might use that. But generally, they like to put their own stamp on it and use their own headline. Above that is a line of desks, various aspects of the paper, various subjects: science, business, sports, city, features. And these have editors, and usually these desks also have contributory reporters. It might not be the reporters on the bottom line, it might be people who actually work directly for these desks. So they specialize in their subjects. And we'll talk later about finding the appropriate reporter to approach for your story. It's no good giving a travel writer a sports story or the other way around, because it'll get ignored, it'll get thrown away. Above that, news editor, managing editor, editor-in-chief. These can change, all these can be interchangeable. Sometimes the sub-editors are above the desks, the subject desks, and they handle the judging the stories that come from there as well. But basically, that's a kind of template for how a newsroom is set up. And that's across not just print publications, it's also across radio and TV stations as well. So an office is not just the reporters, it's people they report to. And reporters, like everybody else, they're just like you and me. They all have to pay bills. They're all working people. They all have to pay mortgages. So treat them with a bit of respect and don't demand things from them. Okay? So what you don't want to give the media, this is a great phrase, the free puff. I actually thought it had disappeared, but Joju tells me it hasn't. It's a lovely old phrase, and it basically means a free ad, and it's a derogatory term. You get stories that appear that are contributed to newsrooms, and a reporter will take one look at it and say, oh, it's just a free puff, and it will go straight in the bin, or it will get deleted from his mailbox. So puff or puffery is news dressed up, advertising dressed up as news. And it will be something which has unsubstantiated claims in it. It will be just talking about the product itself with no objectivity. It won't be a news story, and it won't go anywhere. They used to say in the old days that the difference between news and advertising was that if you want to put an advert in a paper, you buy a blank space and you put what you want in that blank space because you own it, it's yours. And within reason, you can say what you want about a product. You can't really these days because there's advertising standards, but that's the general concept of advertising. News is different. News columns have to be credible, they have to be objective, they have to be a news story, and they're structured in a way that read like news. They don't have massive claims about the benefits or the perceived benefits of a product. So the media also don't want a story that's already been covered by them, because they've covered that story. They cover a story, they move on. Unless it's a different angle about that subject, a new angle that nobody's covered before, then they might be interested. But don't give them stories about something that's already happened. They don't want material that isn't easily understood. In the last webinar, we talked about how to structure a press release to make it appealing to a journalist. So they don't want something that they have to read to the very end to find out the point of the story. They want to get the story in the first paragraph or the first couple of paragraphs. They don't want material that's full of bad spelling, it's full of bad grammar, it's full of horrendous mistakes. That will just get thrown away, because if you're sending that kind of material to them, you're not being professional and you're not treating them with the respect they deserve. They don't want material that's boring, and they don't want to waste time on a non-story, a story that goes nowhere, which is of absolutely no interest to them or their readers or their local community or their trade audience. Okay. So what do they want? They want material that's newsworthy and of interest to their readers. They want facts, details, and relevance, and they want something that's easy to understand. Now, this can be given to them pre-packaged, like the press releases we talked about in the last webinar, which are very good press releases with everything laid out in an easy to read flowing format with all the important stuff at the top and all the fluff at the end. If it has to get cut to fit a space, they can cut out the piece at the end with no trouble, without really bothering about it. Or you can give them something that has the potential to be developed with news angles and photo opportunities. This actually goes to the types of journalists that you'll come across and you deal with. Some journalists are a bit laid back and they'll appreciate a story that they don't have to do anything to. They'll look at it and they'll just submit it as is. Great for you. Not really good for the integrity of the newspaper, in my opinion. When I worked as a journalist, I always liked to be the next guy, the or one, who looked at it and tried to find something different in it and tried to find these news angles and to develop my own perspective on the story. But these are the two types of journalists you'll come across, and these are the needs they have. So if you're putting a story together, these are the two types that you might want to consider doing. Okay. Basically, the outcome you want of your pitch to media is success. You want media coverage. And these are some of the coverages the coverage that you might get. If you're launching a new product, you might basically get your press release printed with a review of that product in column inches, and that will be it. You might get a photo or video story. You might submit it with a photo. They might want to do their own photo. Nowadays, a lot of websites, news websites, do their own videos as well, which gives another interesting dimension to the story. You might get a breaking news story. If you were to come up tomorrow with a cure for COVID-19, I guarantee you would get a breaking news story all over the world. But in our frame of reference, we're not likely to get a breaking news story. But these are the kind of news stories that sometimes appear in newspapers. You might get a feature story. You might get a journalist like the one before who wants to dig into it and put his own stamp on it. He might want to follow up, analyze it. He might want to lengthen it out. So you'll end up with something not only on the news pages, but also on the feature pages as well, for a more in-depth look and in-depth read of your story, which is obviously good. Okay.
Thank you, Robin. At this point, we finished part one. Are there any questions?
Robin, can you give me an example? What's a breaking news story for businesses?
If you're talking about trade publications or any publications,
Any
you could have a new chairman of a company. You could have somebody getting kicked off the board. You could have a completely new product, which is a game changer. Like companies, recently, a while back, there were companies, when all the discussion was about plastic pollution, there were companies that were coming up with products to clear up plastic waste in the oceans, to scoop it up. A company came up with a new barge. So that's obviously a good news story. It's of interest to everybody. That covers, it's not just trade, that covers news as well. So anything that's novel, anything that causes discussion, anything that causes controversy. And the value of a news story is that they roll on. It's not just a story itself. There's other people will look at it and take different angles. They'll ask other people what they think about it. The story of a chairman getting kicked off the board will roll on forever, probably until a new board is appointed. And maybe the guy who's been kicked off wants to have his say about it and cause a bit of controversy.
And earlier on, you talked about prepackaged news. I kind of find this more and more here. Do you see it in other parts of the world as well?
You mean news releases?
Yeah, the prepackaged news that you talked about. So everything is prepackaged into the press release, rather than the journalists trying to find new angles and doing more homework themselves.
No, I found that in every market I've worked in the Middle East, the English language newspapers in Dubai used to print the story as it was submitted without any changes at all. But you wouldn't get your name on it. They'd always put by a staff writer
that's right.
as the byline, which covers themselves, because a staff writer can be anybody. It doesn't have to be somebody in the newsroom. So you'll find it in all markets. It's great. I mean, when I was in public relations, clients used to love it because it's basically guaranteed coverage. I didn't. I always liked journalists to follow up. And when I was a journalist, I took great pride in getting a press release and rewriting it to get my old angle. And there are journalists like that around as well. I think you can't personify one market, a media in one market as one particular type. These two types exist. The laid back ones and the diligent ones exist in every market. When you get to know the media, it's good to work out who's who and to find the right one to work with. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sorry, this is Jojo here. I just want to jump in and say that about staff writers. The publications have staff writers. They some of them are interns, some of them are very experienced journalists, but they come in as part-time. Okay, because my sister was one of them when she left the newspaper, and then they called her back in, and she only worked weekends for them. So, for example, staff writers, the bulk of their jobs is to look through what they get from the news wires or viral feeds and all that stuff. So they pull the information from there, then they look at it and they start writing from there. So it's really very desk bound. So and they just look at the words. And essentially what I'm trying to say is that fun and interesting, catchy headlines are the ones that stand out at them. Okay, they don't look at depth. They just look at short stories that they can post up and then get the eyeballs for the publication.
There are no more questions in the group chat either.
Okay, great, thank you. So Robin, we're going to go into the fundamentals of a media pitch.
Okay.
Over to you.
Okay, so the nuts and bolts of a media pitch. We put a definition of what a media pitch is at the top there. An email or a phone call offering a news story to a journalist or editor of a newspaper, magazine, radio, or television station, it's a bit like the start of a press release. Everything is there in the first paragraph. Everything's summed up. So But from your perspective, you should approach this whole thing as you do, as I hope you do everything else in business. You could approach it as a business transaction. You should plan it, you should strategize around it, you should get your tactics together and not just wing it and go in, because you'll be wasting your time. So the aim of the pitch is to create interest in the story and to find out if the contact is willing to use it. What you got to remember is that news offices and news desks get many people phoning them up every day with pitches, and everybody who phones up thinks that their story is the best story in the world, and they get tired of a lot of people phoning them up. In Dubai, one of the English language papers in Dubai, one of the news editors there told me they got 50 pitches a day when this was in the 90s, when Dubai was really booming and there were lots of PR companies. And they had very strict parameters of what they would accept. I mean, they let people send stuff to them, but they actually set up their own box ticking procedure. If it wasn't local, if it was fluff, if it was a free puff, they would just get thrown out. So the bottom line for you is that a successful media pitch will help your business gain publicity for your company. And another good benefit is that you build good relations with the media for future coverage. If you're giving good pitches with good stories that they want to use, well, when you phone up, they're going to want to talk to you. Or when you send an email, they're going to want to look at it. They're not going to have you on their list that they're just going to flick away and not bother with. So your pitch has to be good. Okay. Okay, pitching procedures. The first, as I say, it's a strategy of putting this together. The first part of your strategy is to research your local media. Start reading your local newspapers, listen to your news, the radios, look at who's there, read the papers every day and see who's writing the stories. Find out the journalists' names, find out who writes what. You might see a journalist, they might even have titles like transport correspondent or lifestyle correspondent or whatever. Find the one that you want to target. And also in your local media environment, you might have newswires there. You might have internationals like Reuters or Thomson's or even Bloomberg's, who might be useful to you if you have a story that you want to get out further afield, if it has enough weight. Trade or your industry media within your own industry is good for your business to business communications. So find out about these publications, look at them. Business to business, you might be in an industry where you're a supplier. You might want to tell your customers about a new product you have for something that they might need. So that's a good avenue for you to get publicity. So build a contact list. Identify the best contact for your story. A lot of stories these days, they'll have a byline, they'll have the name of the journalist at the top, but a lot of them now put email addresses of the journalist at the end. When I first saw that happening, I thought it was dangerous because, you know, if I was a journalist, I wouldn't want my email address out there to have anybody. You never know who might, you know, send you anything in this day and age with all the trolls around. But these, if they have their email address, you can use that as access to them. You can get their phone number. You can phone the switchboard of the newspaper or magazine to find out the best. They might have direct numbers, or you might have to go through the switchboard to contact them. So build your contact media list from that. One thing to remember is in defining your media list that all these journalists, as I said before, work to deadlines. The last thing they want when they're under a deadline and there's 10 minutes to deadline and they're trying to get a story together and finish it and phone somebody up for an extra quote is you phoning them up to talk about a new product you've got. So when you're doing your research for the media, find out the deadlines they work to. If it's a paper like the Straits Times of Singapore, it's a morning newspaper, their deadline might be late at night. It might go to print, sorry, it might go to press at about 11 o'clock at night, maybe even later these days. So they may come into work at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you could phone the switchboard, have a chat to the operator, find out the best time to contact them and the best time where they'll be willing to have time to talk to you. When you do that, they are going to be more amenable to talking to you, because they'll have time to sit back and talk. And as I say, the last thing I want is somebody being a pest when they're working to get something done. Okay. So here's an example of a basic media list, which, as you can see from the blank spaces on the right, still needs a lot to be filled in. It's basically, it's from Singapore. It's talking on the left about the type of media, the dailies, the weeklies, the broadcast media, and the trade media. The names of the publication. What has to be filled in on columns to be added on the right is the name of the journalist, email address, and phone number. And an extra column I would recommend you put on the end is the best time to call them. If you do that and you're going to spend a day contacting the media, you can actually put together a kind of time calendar of the day to contact them. Okay. So as part of your checklist, look back at your press release and go back to what we talked about before in the previous webinar. In point number 1 is the 5 W's and the H. Now, your press release should answer all these questions, preferably at the top in the first paragraph, which is hard to do, usually the first and second paragraph. So does it answer all these questions? Because if it doesn't, they're not going to be interested in it. How interesting is the story? Basically, how interesting is it? Something that would interest you? Is it something that would interest your friends? How can you tweak it up? Can you put data in there? I mentioned before that media always like facts. You can see in the current coverage of COVID-19, it's full of facts. It's full of infection rates. It's full of numbers of deaths. It's full of contact tracing. It's full of different countries' numbers. All that kind of stuff is meat and drink to media. So can you add anything in there to get them more interested? Which media is going to be interested in the story? As I've said before, no good sending a travel story to a sports journalist. What's the particular kind of media that you're going to be interested in? Which desk on a newspaper will be interested in the story? The travel desk, the sports desk, the business desk, and drilling down further, which journalist in your research would be interested in looking at the story? When you've done all that, have a look at it again. How can you make it more interesting? How can you get something more interesting for the journalist to be interested in it? Okay. Your actual pitch yourself, once you've got your raw material together, you've got your press release together, is once again, go over it, look at your target media, and work out the weight of your story. One tip to do that is discuss with a colleague or a friend and try and practice on them. See if they're interested in it. If they're not, it's probably likely that a journalist isn't either. The actual pitching process itself can either be a phone call or an email. Even if it isn't an email, you have to follow up with a phone call. So find out the correct number to call, find out the best time to call and the name. If that name is Robert Smith, don't phone up and say, "Hi, Bob." Once you get a relationship together, you might be able to call them by a nickname or a short name, but Mr. Smith is your first introduction. Be professional. As I say, it's just like a business meeting, and make your pitch to the journalist. "Good morning, Mr. Smith. My name is so-and-so. I'd like to send you a story about a new product we have on the market. I wonder if you'd be interested in it." And then refer back to the previous page, the who, why, and all of the 5 W's and the H, and go through a little checklist of why you think it's of interest to the journalist. It's local, it's relevant at the time, it relates to a current topic, and don't be a nuisance. If it's pretty obvious that he's busy and doesn't want to talk to you, ask if there's a better time when you can call back, or is there somebody else who might be interested in it? One tip is don't be the person in the newsroom that nobody wants to talk to. When I worked in a newspaper years ago in the UK, there was a woman who used to phone up practically every month, practically every week sometimes, trying to tell us about her story. Her story was, it wasn't a news story. She'd fallen off a bus years before, and she was trying to get compensation from the bus company. And everybody she went to had turned her down. The bus company turned her down. Her local MP didn't see anything in it. Her local councillor didn't see anything in it. So she thought the media would be interested. We weren't. But she phoned us up every week, and every time she phoned up, people would run for the hills because nobody wanted to talk to her. And it got to the stage where when we had a junior in the office, we gave the junior the job to talk to her because we knew it was going to be a waste of time. So don't be that person. What responses can you expect from your pitch? Well, one response you might get is quite a natural one. Why should I cover this? If you do get that response, you should have your little checklist to go through with reasons why you think they should. Don't say they should. Don't demand they should, but why you think they should and why you think it would be interesting to them and their readers. It's local, it's topical. I think it's interesting. You may get one of the diligent reporters coming back and saying, have you got any more information? So have a backup for that. He may want an interview with you, or he may want an interview with somebody mentioned in the release, maybe a supplier of product if it's a trade release. That, again, is for a future webinar because there are certain techniques in dealing with the media and how not to get tripped up. So you might get that response, you might get the negative response, you might get a positive response asking for more information. More than likely, you'll get one in between. Thank you very much. Leave it with me. I'll see if it's of interest. Well, thank you very much. As you can see, Mr. Journalist, if you have more questions, my email address and phone number is on the bottom of the release, so please get in touch. Then you can call back the next day once. Don't be the nuisance. Don't keep phoning up and saying, what's happened to my story? Just politely ask, did you get the story? Is there any chance you might do anything with it? If not, take it on the chin. Use it as a learning process to learn for your next pitch. I was once phoned up when I was in public relations. There was something we'd sent out. I was phoned up. He phoned me. I didn't phone him. And he was from a national newspaper. And he phoned me up to tell me why they weren't going to use it. I think in retrospect, he was trying to be clever and he was trying to make a point because he didn't like PR people. But I didn't argue with him. I said, thank you. I thanked him. Thank you very much. That's of great value to me. So don't be rude. Don't argue with them. Don't get into an argument. And don't be disparaging. Don't get defensive. Oh, well, I think it's of value. What's your problem? Just take it on the chin, accept what they're saying and learn from it. So you'll know next time. The next time you phone him up, you'll know the right approach to take. You'll know what he likes or what he doesn't like. And hopefully he will remember you in a good way. He'll want to talk to you to find out what you have to say. Okay? Now, one thing to remember when you're building relationships with journalists, and hopefully all your media pitching will build your relationships with journalists, and you'll end up becoming a valued contact. You'll hopefully become the person they want to take a call from when they hear you're on the line because they know you're going to give them a good story. But one thing to remember is a journalist is not your best buddy. They are friendly business transactions, your relationship with journalists, but they have risks and they have downsides, and you should always be aware of potential negatives. The diligent reporters, some of them are always looking for negatives in stories, and they'll try and pick out negatives. You might have seen, I don't know what the media is like in your part of the world, but I've been seeing coverage of COVID-19 in the UK and in Australia. And the media these days seem to have a default setting of being negative about everything. Every time a government announces something about a new system they have for COVID-19 testing or whatever, the first thing they do is pick faults in it. They'll try and put their own spin on it. They'll try and pick faults. They'll try and undermine the whole thing. I find it a bit boring these days because they're all trying to make a name for themselves. And a lot of them think they're rock stars, especially if they're on TV. So be aware that in your dealings with journalists, he might be waiting for you to say something that he can use to build another story. And one example or a couple examples I can give to you of that is when I worked in the UK in the newspaper, on a local newspaper, the local council and the police put together a road safety program, and they had a media event to launch it, and the police were there, and the local mayor was there in his robes and his chain, and all this finery. And they gave little speeches at the press conference, and then they set up a photo opportunity. And the photo opportunity was some police standing with the mayor against a backdrop of a logo of this road safety campaign. And one of the police was a motorbike cop, and because it road safety, he had his motorbike with him. And he stood there in the picture at the front, and there was about 10 or 12 or maybe even 15 journalists there from TV, radio. And one guy was a guy I ended up working with who was a very diligent journalist. And he noticed that the mayor looked a bit uncomfortable having his photograph taken and didn't look happy. And when they asked him to smile for the camera, he didn't. So when the photo op was over and all the other journalists went away, this guy went over to the mayor and said, "You don't look very happy about that. Is a reason for it?" And he said, "Well, between you and me, that's a Japanese motorbike. It was a Yamaha or a Kawasaki or something. I was a prisoner of the Japanese in the Second World War, and I was in the death camp in Thailand for 3 years. I hate the Japanese, and I'll never buy anything Japanese. And frankly, when I turned up today and saw a Japanese motorbike, I was insulted. And there's no way I'm going to stand in front of a motorbike, a Japanese motorbike with a Japanese name on." And he sounded off like that. So this guy took the story down, and his story and the headline that evening, because it was an evening newspaper, was all about the mayor saying he would never have anything to do with Japanese because of his experience in the war. And actually, this guy was such a cunning guy, he sold the story to the national newspapers, and the next day it was all over the nationals as well. It was page lead. All these other TV stations followed up on it, and of course, the downside of it was the police weren't happy because nowhere in that story was there mention of a road safety campaign, which was at the point of the whole exercise. And so just be aware that there are journalists who sometimes have a different agenda, and especially these days, they're looking to poke holes in things and get their own story out. Another just quick example I can give you of that, which will reinforce it, is at the same time in the UK, there was another local authority who appointed a very high-positioned community relations officer. And a reporter I knew went around to interview her, and he was another one of these types. And he was sitting chatting to her about a new job, and she had a photograph taken at the desk, sitting on the phone. And she talked for a long time about the responsibilities she had in the job and the value of community relations to local communities in this day and age, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the conversation, he said to her, "Well, do you have any other interests in, when you're not doing this work?" And she said, "Well, I'm very interested in amateur dramatics." "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yes, I used to be a member of this well-known dramatic society in Birmingham." And he said, "Well, did you ever appear in any plays that I might have seen?" And she said, "Well, not really, but when I was younger, I was offered an audition for Hair." And some of you of a certain age might remember in the 60s and 70s, there was a controversial musical in the West End of London called Hair, which was of its time. It was like hippie and alternative and groundbreaking. And the main thing about Hair was that halfway through, all the cast got their clothes off and danced around nude on stage. And it was a big story in these days. So she told him, without thinking anything of it, that she once was auditioned. She said she didn't do it. Her mother wouldn't let her do it. But so the headline next day was, new community relations, senior community relations officer almost danced nude on the West End stage. And that was the story. So she went ballistic, her bosses went ballistic, and then they started getting complaints about, is this a fit and proper person to be teaching us about community relations? So two little examples there which show you some of the meticulous way that media can work. As I said before, there's ones which are more laid back and just want to get their job done and go home at night, but there are others who will dig away and try and get a negative. So just a couple of things to be aware of. Okay. So expanding relationships with the media is obviously a plank of your media pitch. You want to create long-lasting relations with a journalist that will be amenable to your pitch, will know that you're not going to waste his or her time. And you might end up being a resource for the journalists as well. That's another aspect to it. If they're working on a story within a certain industry about a development which is going to transform that industry, whether it be transport or IT or whatever, they'll remember you as somebody involved in that industry. They might phone you up for a quote, and then you'll be positioned as an authority of that industry in the story. You may start inviting them to media events, and Joju's going to talk about media events in the next section. But that's another way to expand your relationships, not just over the phone, but to meet them. Another way, which was a big thing in the old days, but I don't think it's done very much these days, is to meet media over a drink. As far as I can see, a lot of media don't drink these days, but in the old days, a lot of drinking was done and a lot of stories were generated in pubs. A dangerous environment. You never know what you're going to say, and in a pub and how it's going to get blown up. I can tell you a lot more stories about that, but that's for another time. So basically, don't treat your media pitch as a one-off. It's your first media pitch is the beginning of hopefully a mutually beneficial relationship for you and the journalists as well. So maintain contact with them. You might get to the stage where even if you don't have a story, you can phone up for a chat. Obviously at a time when they've got time to talk and they're not under a deadline. So use your media pitch as the first stage in hopefully a growing and beneficial relationship for you and your company. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, so everybody, I think we have about 5 minutes more, but if you don't mind, I'm going to extend for another 10 minutes. I've got a couple of examples to take you through. So you've heard from Robin the preparation work that you need at steps 1, 2, and 3 for your media pitch. Now, sometimes we do get questions whether you should do your media list first or should you do your content first, which is your press release or your media invite, okay? So the answer to it is that you should have an idea of what you want to say, which is actually the content in step 2, an idea of it, especially what's the news, what's so relevant about it, what's special about it, is it the first in the industry or something. So then what happens is that but you still have to do back to step 1, which is build all your contact list, drill down into the specifics of which particular journalist that you're targeting, and then go from there. So step 1, build your media list. Step 2, all your content, and then step 3 is to merge everything together and look at it and say, okay, do a sanity check. Does it work? Is there a different angle I can give to a particular person that I really, really need to target? So that's the 1, 2, 3 step. Now here's the example. I have, we've actually done, this is a sample press release. We did this last month, creating a press release about a local craft maker creating a range of fabric face masks for people of all ages, all sizes, to be used for the post-lockdown era. So 8 sizes to fit toddlers under 2, the age of 2, to plus size adults. Because I have some friends in my cat community, they are plus size, and the little masks, the standard masks, are so small, it doesn't fit them well at all. Okay, so they would prefer larger sizes to fit their faces. Now then, in the same product release, we had talked about some business tie-ups as well for this company with freelance workers to offer them jobs. Now, this is hypothetical, but I will just show you how I would plan this. So I have 2 media targets, and I've actually narrowed them down. If you see at the bottom of the screen, first one is the local daily. And there is this lady called Stephanie. She covers the lifestyle section of the local daily. Now, she had recently done a story on how to get children to wear their face masks, because you know how kids are. They'll put it on for like post for a photo, and then after that they'll rip it off because they really hate it, right? But you need them to go out when they're out at the supermarket with you or running errands or in school to wear that. So she had a little story around that with the moms and all that. So our story about the product release, we're going to pitch it as the launch of this new face mask, but at the same time, because Father's Day is coming up, so it will be great as a father and child story, going outdoors again, enjoying the outdoors socially a responsible way, and so it's a really good father and child bonding story. So that's one. Now the other target is business story. Business Times reporter Lynette, she has been covering the local business beat. We call it beat. Is a short form for news desk. It's different desk. Okay, so she covers the local business beat. She has been writing stories for a number of years about what we call the gig economy. So there's a lot of freelance workers out there who are tapped into this new economy. So her story would then be how another local firm is helping other local firms, other locals in the gig economy who are affected by COVID-19 by offering them jobs or ad hoc projects. So this is the press release that we have. So when what I will normally do is I'll send out the press release, and within the hour, I will call the journalist. Okay. So the timing of the press release is really depending on what time I know they come into work. So, if I know they come in at 10 o'clock, I will send at 10:15, okay, and then call before 11 to, tell them that, okay, so and so introduce myself, I'm representing this company, and we have this announcement here. So run through very quickly, just the first paragraph or the lead, and at least get their attention. And I will have to use the words that they are used to. So for Stephanie, I will say, okay, talk about kids and the face mask, and then link that to the upcoming Father's Day special for them. They have 2 weeks to write the story. Then for Lynette, I will use the word gig economy, even though it's not in the press release, but for her, I will have to say that on the phone. So that's one example. The other one is, so this other example I'm going to show you is a pitch for an event. All right. So sometimes when I look at an announcement that I'm working on, and for this one, it's actually a nursing home, All Saints Home. They've got a new center opening. It's just 197 beds, but it is set in Singapore, which has an aging population. And the government has actually set aside plans to build 20,000 nursing home beds in the next few years. All right. So yes, 197 in a 20,000 pool isn't a lot, but it is still important. So they wanted to talk about, what the donors can expect, where their money has gone to, in terms of the programs and activities offered to these nursing home residents. And what I like is that when I was talking to them, I found out they have very creative therapies for the residents, things like table tennis therapy. And when we did some research about it, no other center, no media had actually written about table tennis therapy over here. I did see another small nursing home that had posted it on their Facebook, just a little event, but no media had covered that. So I thought, So when I spoke to the client, I said that, you know what, you don't just have to do a press release, you can actually do an event, okay? Because I can see a photo opportunity, I can see a TV coverage for this because, it's kind of a happy story in that. So overall, we planned it and we pitched it as a nursing home event. Okay, come to the opening, meet our CEO, hear a bit about the center, tour the facilities, and then join him and some of the patients, the residents, in the game of table tennis. So in other words, the media gets to go there, not just to sit and listen and write stuff, but they can actually participate in that table tennis. So when I called up and pitched that story, I was lucky. The TV crew just said, they don't remember the name of the center. They just said, is that the table tennis one? We're sending a crew. Okay, so they remember that and they sent a crew down, and we got that out of the way. So we use that as a hook. Oh, this is just briefly to show you the structure of how you would do a media invitation. Keep it short, have the headline and then a little preamble, and then give them the details, the really clear details, like, okay, what time, what date, and where's the address, and then the RSVP. That's very important. All right, so this is just a quick one. And after that, we had people coming in. So the newspapers and some of the web art media, they brought in their own photographers and they took photos. So we had TV crew and we had photos, which is really played to our advantage because we really centered on this. So to sum up everything that we talked about in the planning, a good media pitch needs to be very, very clear and simple for the media. It's something that they can understand. I know, like, for example, the old folks home, they want to talk about this thing about 360 care for their elderly patients and all that. And I was like, it's not going to get through to the media. So keep it simple and clear. Now, then before that, it's not seen, but it actually has, it takes a lot of research, a lot of planning. And once you go through all that content, you have to have a creative angle, okay, in order to have that good media pitch out to the media. Then number 3 is that make it valuable to the media, but also very valuable to your own brand or your client if you're representing a client. So it has to be a two-way relationship. There are people who just say that, oh, I'm just doing it for the media, but there's nothing really in it for me. I mean, my business isn't really in this particular area of coverage that the media is looking for. Well, then don't do it. You know, make it valuable for both the media and for yourself. That's it. After this, we'll be sending out a note. You can actually download your free workbook so that you can use the tips that Robin had given you. Are there any questions?
Jojo, I have a question. Earlier on, you talked about the Whirly Twirly story, right? And you had the lifestyle story, and then you had the
business story.
Yeah, the business story. So when you write your press release, do you write it differently for both the different media, or you just have one standard press release and they find their own angle?
When I worked on this, right, it is just one press release, okay, but in the pitch out to the media, I did it as both. I would do it as phone call as well as email, right? So in the phone call, that's when I make it special for them, okay? But at the same time, you can also, in your email to them, attaching the press release, you can put the words that the journalist is used to. So like I said, for Lynette, I will have to use the word gig economy. For Stephanie, I will have to go back to that father and child story that I'm angling for, because she is writing family lifestyle stories. So you have to be very cognizant of each reporter. It goes back to the point that Robin had talked about earlier, which is step 1, all right? When you look at the media, the different desks, and then down to the specific reporter, when you know what the reporter has covered before, you will really have to use those keywords that the reporter has used to really resonate with them. So then it will jump out at them. Like I said, the reporters and then staff writers, all they see is text, when they open up their email, text, something has to jump at them, okay? So that's where you get that jump.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Are there any other questions from the rest?
Christine, any question from you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's more so, I just find with our radio media here in Melbourne that the DJs are very negative. They seem to always pick a bad angle to whatever's going on for every person that's, on the other line. I don't know if it makes me scared to go into that little environment and they're going to pick at you, and it just puts me off altogether, thinking maybe I shouldn't even do it because they're going to find a bad angle because they seem to do it for everybody. So it's more of a comment, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's true. Radio and TV interviews, right, especially if it's live interviews, I would not recommend to new novices. Okay, it's a tricky one. If it's a radio talk show, maybe, or recorded TV interview, but even then, I would be very, very careful. I've done radio before, where it's actually a book launch, and it's a super boring book. It's written by a bunch of lawyers. Okay, they're either lecturers or practicing lawyers, and it's about, and each chapter is a different type of law. So you've got estate law, you've got conveyancing, you've got, you know, litigation. It's so boring. Then I looked at it and I asked the publisher, who are you targeting for this? He says, well, actually it's the parents of kids in secondary school, you know, who want their kids to go into law, to read law in the universities. And I was like, oh my God. So then, but you see, parents listen to radios, and there's a particular talk show that I knew that people would do it. But at that time, it was just the presenter, Stanley, and he would just talk off the cuff with whoever's on it, and he would do a book review. So when I pitched to him, I wrote it out and I discussed it with my client. I said, okay, you need 3 lawyers here. The publisher himself was a former lawyer who became a publisher. One of the authors of the book, the professor who wrote one of the chapters, and then a practicing lawyer who also contributed to the book. Okay, so I said, 3 of you, can you do a talk show with this presenter and tell them why you put this together and why you took law and why you switched? Because, you know, it's better to hear from them. Why did they leave the legal profession? I mean, for the publisher or for the professor. So then the spotlight is still on the book, okay, but it's their stories. So, you know, it worked that way. Thank God, okay, because it became a personal story for each one of them. So they were very happy to be on radio. But yeah, Christine, it is a tricky thing. It's always easier to send it as a press release and then make that phone call to the reporter to run the story.
I've done a few radio interviews.
Sorry?
Are those these people you're talking about? Are they DJs or journalists?
Yeah.
They are actually, yeah. So Christine, are they DJs or journalists?
Yeah, more DJs that are on the times that I find people are in the cars going to work and
yeah, I'd be very wary about that, because they're not journalists, and they're just looking to put something on that's controversial,
Yeah.
you know, and will get them, you know, a lot of talk. And I've listened to Australian radio. I know exactly the kind of people that you're talking about. I would be very, very careful, because they might hang you out to dry, and they'll do it for their own ego, really.
Yes.
Yeah. I've done a number of radio interviews before, and the way I do it is I actually talk to, and those are news. It's not DJ. I don't like to do to promote a business or product through a DJ, and it worked out very well, because we do have like a discussion with the ABC News, for example, and say, you know, this is how we want to position the story, or, you know, if they have, sometimes they have questions, and we just prep, you know, the customer or the client.
Yeah, dealing with journalists is different, but
Yes.
DJs are they're just out for a shock effect.
I have a question.
Yep, no, go ahead.
My sector, which is classified as, I guess, quite boring, mineral resource, mineral exploration, I get the feeling that the mainstream media really don't go for this unless you're talking about Andrew Forrest or CRA or Rio Tinto or BHP. So there's hundreds of thousands of these little mineral companies that swim in that pool. And take the West Australian, they actually have a section that is you pay someone and they put you on there. They'll write an article about it. So I tend to, well, correct me if I'm wrong. It's sort of a question out there. Is I find that for my sector, for this area, there's more endorsed things than not. people don't go to a media and say, hey, you know, this is a great story. We found this discovery. I don't think that's going to excite anyone in mainstream media. And hence, there's a lot of these things like proactive investors, stockhead in my industry, who you pay and then they distribute that information out. Is that a fair comment?
It is a fair comment, Noel. What you are talking about is actually B2B communications. Okay, I can take. Okay, I can just address that. So technically, for your story, you need to aim for the trade media. If it's a very specific to certain things that you're pushing out, like a new service or a new discovery, or certain aspects of the mineral area. But from a major newspaper story, okay, whether it's a community story or a national newspaper, they will look at it as an industry as a whole, okay? So industry as a whole, then it is a bit tricky because they will look at it and say, okay, does it offer jobs to the folks? How does it impact the environment? How does it impact the community? So it is the industry versus set in the society kind of story. It is a little tricky because, you know, everybody loves to play a bit with the negatives, right? So environmental devastation, effects like that. So you can take on a different field. Typically, what happens is that I was working on a story with Taiwan about coal-fired power plant. So what happened is that they have implementations in place. They've got stuff inside the coal-fired plant that they know that it will help them achieve better output or cleaner air, but they're still afraid of the NGOs. Okay, they will swamp them if it appears in the newspaper. So they've lined up one professor and one other NGO-ish kind of organization, which they pay, by the way. They pay these two folks, these two consultants, to evaluate their system, what they offer, and then endorse it. So in other words, they will also put these folks out for the interview with that national newspaper. So it's not just on them, but also on these folks. It can be done, but you have to engineer it. You have to plan everything out, and you have to watch for all the potential negatives before you actually embark on it. So there's a little bit more work in there.
I think it also depends on which publication you want to go into. So we can work separately on that. There's a lot of potential for your case.
I guess the term NGO doesn't exist in Australia. It's more very used in Asia, in my industry anyway. We have the in Australia is a bit more structured in how you get a mining project to the end, to the mining stage. So there's hurdles that you need to jump. So you know very clear what hurdles you have to jump before you proceed down that road.
Yeah. In the US, they have lobbyists and activists, you know, so they will always have that core group, right? Because the activists, of course, will go on all the negative issues and the lobbyists will be supporting you, but you have to pay all these, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So any questions from Tarishi or Switching? Oh, Tarishi, are you still there?
Do you want to introduce the next webinar?
Okay, so I think there's no questions. So I'll go to the next one.
I think this is very, very useful.
Okay, so next session, yeah, it's going to be on visual communications. All right. The idea is that when you do an ad, video story, or even provide an image to go with your press release or your content, what are the images to look up for? What should be, okay, your visual communication strategy? So this is going to be our stuff. I mean, it used to be using sex to sell. So retailers use it a lot um, for their products. But what about for regular businesses like ours? Okay. So that's coming up on the 23rd of June, also the same time as today.
You can do one based on the mining industry. I want to see how you use sex to sell the mining industry.
Well, the question is, does it sell?
Yeah, the
So
miners
yes, we
will
will
come for
have
the
that.
webinar.
Yeah, so we're going to have to do this as your visual comms strategy. Okay, you need to have the right strategy for that. And for this, we have is a panel discussion. I'll be the moderator. We will have Veronica. We will have Stuart, who is actually a photographer and videographer. And we also have Fang Ting. Fang Ting is a visual comms specialist. She used to be pure professional, and then she switched over to doing graphics design or doing design work. All right. Any other questions from anybody else?
Nope.
No, but I
Okay,
think
great.
it's very good. I want to thank Jojo and Robin, especially Robin. It shows that you have so much in-depth knowledge and experience in this field. So it's really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to encourage everyone along, because even if you feel that you have a small media list, so Noel, if you think that, don't limit yourself. Okay, start with the media list, and then look for the right people inside there. Then of course your content, and then the third step is put everything together and go through that. I had a quick look at your website, Christine. I think it's bin odor solutions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw kitty litter, and I was like, oh, sorry.
Make that sound nice, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you have some content in there that you can really play with, because it's quite fun. It's good stuff.
Introduce a sexy looking cat, you mean?
You can always email me separately. We can have a chat about that. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. I just want to encourage everyone on give it a try, and say that tell you that all these are tips, and just work on it. Even if you have 2 or 3 media that you want to try it out, just go ahead and go for it. Lastly, we're here to help, and we're here to stay open and stay ready and available for business together with you guys. Okay. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.